Hey guys, Danny Johnson here, and today we're going to be installing this wheel hub assembly. This comes with the bearing already pressed in and everything. Really nice unit. In fact, this is the way that I'd recommend doing it. These are real nice. They come with a whole new wheel speed sensor or ABS sensor already on there. They come with new studs already as well, as you can tell. And you want to make sure that you get the proper amount of studs so that it works with your application. Sometimes there's 8 studs, sometimes there's 6, and it's really quite simple. We're just going to be undoing these 3 bolts in the back to get it off, and there's going to be a pretty good size nut here, 36 millimeter, that we're going to have to break off. So we'll get started. Okay, so before we lift the truck into the air, we're going to break loose the lug nuts. Now on this truck, this is a 21 millimeter nut here, and if you have a hubcap like this, these aren't the actual lug nuts. These are actually just caps. So you just want to turn them to kind of loosen them up. And once you do that, then you'll be able to pull this cover off. So don't put an impact gun or anything on these, or you'll probably just break them. So just unscrew all these. Okay, so with these loosened up, this cover now just comes right off. As you can see, it was just plastic behind it, so you don't want to be breaking any of those. And now we're going to go up from a 21 millimeter to a 22 millimeter, or also a 7/8 works for the actual lug nuts. Now we're just going to break these loose. We're not going to take them all the way off, but while the weight of the wheel's on the ground, we're just going to break these loose about a 1/4 of a turn or 1/2 a turn. Okay, so now we're just repeating this now on the passenger side. We're going to do this to both wheels, and it's also going to help to have both of the front wheels in the air, as you'll see, so we can turn the steering wheel and have better access to everything. Okay, so next we put the truck on jack stands here on the frame, and we did that on both sides. We used our floor jack there and just lifted here on the frame. And it was good to get both of the wheels in the air because we're going to be turning the steering wheel back and forth to better access everything. So that's why you want both the wheels in the air. I went ahead and took off these lug nuts, so now I'm just removing this wheel. Now these hubs can be kind of hard to get off. You have to come in right here with a screwdriver and pound on them. If it gives you too much trouble, just punch through it like that, and then you can just get this screwdriver in here and just rip it off, whatever. Okay, there's our 36 millimeter nut that we have to get off now. Okay, so this part's really important. Once you get that hub cap off, this is when you want to take off this axle nut, and this is a 36 millimeter. It's a big one. You'll probably have to go buy that socket or order it online. Now, keep in mind, if you have an impact gun, you'll be able to take this off at any step of the process. If you're doing this with just a breaker bar, you want to do this before you take your brake off so that you can get inside the car, have somebody hold the brakes, or just while the car's sitting on the ground still even, somehow. But yeah, you need somebody to hold the brakes basically while you break this loose. Otherwise, you'll take the brake off and you'll have no way of stopping this whole system from moving as you go and try to break it loose. Okay, so here's our 36 millimeter socket on there, and this way we can break it loose with the breaker bar. We're actually going to be going the other way with it here. We're going to be going downwards for the passenger side. So we need somebody inside to push on the brake while we break that loose. Remember, you're going lefty-loosey, and when we put it on, righty-tighty. So just remember that. Okay, so next we're going to remove the caliper here. We're just going to unbolt it and set it aside. You don't want to hang it by the brake lines either, so get a jack or a 5-gallon bucket works good on its top to set this on. But it's just 2 18 millimeter bolts, and so you're just getting the one right here, okay, on the bracket frame. Then you come around on the bottom, and there's also one right there. So those are 18 millimeter. Take both of those off and just slide the caliper off. Okay, so don't get confused here. Remember, you're pushing down on this on the driver's side because the bolt's going in this way. So right, tightening it to the right or clockwise would be going up, we're going down with it on both of these bolts. Okay, those two bolts are out, 18 millimeter, one there, one there. Okay, they're just holding the caliper on. We remove the caliper and set it on the jack stand for support. Next, we're going to remove the brake disc. And a lot of times you have these metal clips in here, so you just got to get in behind it with a screwdriver and just pop them off, and then just work them off of the lug stud. Sometimes it helps to get pliers on them, just yank on them like that when you can get the lip twisted up enough. But just get that on there and just give them a good yank. Okay, now you can remove the brake disc. So you just basically pull it off like a tire, and it'll just come off and set it aside. Okay, this is where it helps to have the car in the air on both front wheels, because now we just turn the steering wheel, and that's exposing these bolts better. These are 15 millimeter bolts. There's 3 of them, one here, here, and then down on the back side. You'll see that on the new piece too. It'd be very apparent. So now we'll take out these 3 bolts, 15 millimeter. Now it's always a good idea to take some liquid wrench and hit some of these bolts you're going to be working with so that they loosen up. And if you're doing both sides of the truck, then you can go over and do the other side while you're working on one, just so that they're all loosened up by the time you get over there. Now when breaking these 15 millimeter bolts loose, you have to be very careful of your boot here. You don't want to tear that up. So as you can see, I've put on my 15 millimeter socket, then a little extension just to kind of get away from it all, because we don't want to be up against any of this and tearing it. I've had friends tear it. So once you get that rigged up, you can take a nice weight or something and really just pound down on it, because they might be stuck pretty good. But go ahead and remove those 3 15 millimeter bolts. Okay, so this top bolt, you may have to be a little creative. As you can see, I had to put a 15 millimeter socket on there, and then an extension, and then a maximizer deal so I could get the 1/2 inch breaker on here. And the reason why is we have this boot that's under here, and a regular 15-inch box end wrench wouldn't go over it. A deep socket does not fit over it. So, I mean, as you can see here, there's not a lot of space there. And so even as you put in any kind of weird combination, you're up against that boot. You can see a thicker deep socket would be scratching the boot. So you just have to maybe come up with some weird concoctions here. But what I have is 15 millimeter, a little extension to get it out here, and then maximizing it from a 3/8 inch to a 1/2 inch drive. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit it with a hammer and put this rag back up under here. Okay, so I have this perfect ready to push down on. Now if you go to put the breaker bar in here and it's at the wrong angle, you can take this out and turn it 1/4 of a turn and then put it back in, and that should, choke this back up for you. So we're going to go ahead and break this one loose now. Okay, that broke loose nicely, so we just switched this out to our smaller ratchet to get that one out. So that bolt's loose, this lower one here is loose. We're going to go around the other side here and get that last one on the back. Okay, so now we turn the steering wheel all the way to the left. That's going to give us more room here. And luckily this side's a lot easier. We just have our 15 on there, and once again we went with our extension to kind of get it away from that boot. And remember, on this one now you're pulling upwards to go loose. So don't let that throw you off, but that's the 3rd bolt, this one, that top one, and the one on the other side. So we're just going to leave these broken loose but not all the way off yet. And we're going to go ahead and take off our center hub bolt, which is the 36 millimeter big one. Okay, so we want to follow the speed sensor line that comes up through here, and we're going to take it out of this bracket even, and we're going to follow it all the way up here. And once you see this little blue clip here, this is where it disconnects. So we're just going to lift that tab and unplug this. Okay, so once that's unplugged, we're just going to yank this out. It's the little Christmas tree push pin type thing. And the new one comes with all new of these, so you just come through everywhere that this goes and basically just pull straight up on it, rip it out of there. And then for this one here, I just pinched it with pliers, and then it came through. So just pinch that piece right there, and then it'll come out. So now we're loose here. We removed all 3 of our bolts here in the back. we removed this axle hub, so now we can just slide this whole assembly right off. Okay, we're going to go ahead and just put a little bit of this high temperature grease right here on the splines, and now we're just going to slide our new one back on. Just remember that this little dust shield here, make sure that this doesn't stay off of it. I want to make sure that this goes back on. Now on this dust shield, you want to make sure that this centerpiece here is pointing that way. See how it cuts in? You want it to go in towards the inside of the truck. If you put this on backwards, you'll have that fan piece, this little guard right here, it'll be touching your brake rotor. So make sure that when you put this piece back on, that you have that piece pointed inward. Okay, now is also a good time to get some Loctite and put it on these bolts here. And we're also going to have it on these threads here for our big axle nut to go back on. Okay, so we just put this up on here. We threaded it right into the splines where it belongs. So it slid on. And now we're running our bolts into these three. Now there is a trick to this. You want to get them all started somewhat. But what you'll notice back here on this top bolt, it'll be really hard to get this socket on. And so a trick you can use is once these are all starting to thread, go ahead and pull the whole hub outward towards you. And what that's going to do is it's going to push this bolt inward so you can get the socket on it. Then you can get some extensions on here and tighten it. Otherwise, that bolt right here is going to be in your way. You won't be able to get the socket on, as you can maybe be able to see there. But once again, thread these so that they're started, then pull the whole hub outward, and that'll draw this bolt in so you can get a socket on it. Otherwise, you won't be getting a socket past this. Okay, so those bolts are back in now, good and tight. It helped to turn the steering wheel one way to tighten it up, turn it the other way, get that other one. And once again, we drove this top one in first, and there wasn't a lot of clearance on that, so pulling the hub out pulled that bolt out and really helped thread it. So those are all good and tight now. We just ran our line up through here, just pushed in the clip here. Everywhere it had a new Christmas tree type clip, we just pushed it down in there and plugged it back in up at top. So now we're just ready to put our axle nut right back on in the middle. Okay, so the axle nut's on as tight as we can get it for now. Once we put the car on the ground, we'll be able to really torque it down. But we just got it on as tight as we can, so we're going to go ahead and put the brake rotor back on. Okay, now we're just going to grab our caliper and slide it right back on and put those two bolts back in here and here. Okay, so we just slid that caliper back over the rotor, put in our two 18mm bolts that we had taken out, made sure we had some Loctite on those as well. And so now we're ready to put the wheel on, and if we put the truck down on the ground without this hubcap installed, we'll still have access to this nut and we'll be able to torque it down. Okay, so we've installed the wheel and put the lug nuts on, and we just tighten them down pretty much as tight as we can get them now. We're going to lower the truck until that wheel's just touching the ground, then torque the lug nuts down. Okay, so with the weight of the truck just barely touching the ground, we torqued down the rest of the lug nuts. Went about 100 foot-pounds on those, and then we went after that 36mm nut. It's good while the truck's still somewhat in the air so that it gets on even. So we tightened it down to its proper torque rating as well. So now if you want, you can put your hubcap back over here. I'm actually probably going to leave it off and inspect this in a few days. Anyway, next we can just put on the wheel cover as well. But if you want to just leave it off like this to kind of watch it for a test drive and all that, that's fine. But from there you just put this on, and just remember that you only tighten these a few turns just to get them to lock onto the lug nuts. So put it on flat and then just tighten it until they're snug, but don't break these. Don't put too much pressure on it. So anyway, that's how to change the wheel hub and bearing assembly.